we walked around Central Park. We used a spa in Queens, and we asked people, were they aware of peanut allergy? Were they aware of celiac disease? Or were they aware of gluten sensitivity? And about 88% of people, we also asked chefs the same question. About 88% of people have heard of peanut allergy. 66% had heard of gluten sensitivity, and 40% have heard of celiac disease. So gluten sensitivity is an area that traditional physicians haven't wanted to get into, but they're going to start to have to get into it because there's a lot more literature coming out. Now, certainly, people with dermatitis epidemiformis can have a normal biopsy and they've got a gluten sensitivity. That's because they're making an antibody to a different form of tissue transglutaminase that's in the skin. And there are some people with IBS that get better on a gluten-free diet. And then there are neurological syndromes in which people probably have an antibody to a different form of tissue transglutaminase, one in the brain and in the nervous system. So that's one area of gluten sensitivity. And then you have people who have positive antibodies, especially these anti-Gluten antibodies, but they don't have any disease that we know of as yet. That is a gluten sensitivity. And then there are people who either were never tested or were tested and say they get better on a gluten-free diet. So there's a whole spectrum of gluten sensitivity. So it's not well recognized. There's no way to study it really because there's no code for it. And you've got to look at population studies, epidemiological studies with these ICD codes. So it can't be studied very well. And not all healthcare providers understand about it. Now, we've been interested in gluten sensitivity in psychiatric and neurological problems. And we've found a high rate of these anti-Gluten antibodies in schizophrenia, depression, and ADHD, much higher than in the general population. You know, about 15% of people might have anti-Gluten antibodies. We found 80% of kids that we studied with ADHD had anti-Gluten antibodies. Now, these people, they didn't have any of the celiac antibodies, but they had antibodies to gluten. It really it's not very well understood what it means because there's certainly been no studies that have been performed to examine the effect of a gluten-free diet. I was recently approached by people in the New York State Psychiatric Institute because they want to take a ward of schizophrenics, which actually in the literature, there are papers from the 60s that call schizophrenia bred madness, in the Lancet actually. And they want to take a ward and put them on a gluten-free diet and a ward on a regular diet, just to demonstrate, to study it and see if there's any effect. But it's kind of interesting because none of us evolved to eat wheat. When we eat meat, we fully chop up the protein into single amino acids and dimers, 2s and 3 amino acids. But when all of us eat wheat, we're left with these very large 33 amino acids long because our digestive enzymes didn't evolve to chop up wheat. You know, wheat was only domesticated 10,000 years ago, and it took 3,000 years to domestication to spread to Scandinavian countries and the British Isles. So it's only recently that these grains have become part of our diet. Has anyone here read Guns, Germs and Steel? It's an amazing book because this guy Jared Diamond, who I think is at Stanford, he wrote this book that got the Pulitzer Prize, and he explains how we can live the way we live. And part of it is domestication of grains, and the other, and geography allowed them to spread. And then the other is languages and writing, something like that. So, but the domestication of grains allowed us to develop the way we are. But the downside is that there's an increasing number of people who are sensitive to wheat.